Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Alex. Really glad you could join us today for, well, what looks like a fascinating, maybe slightly sobering look at something affecting a lot of people right now.
Hi. Yes, sobering might be right. I'm ready, though. Let's get into it.
Okay, great. So our focus today is an article I came across in The Economist. The title is pretty direct. It's Why Today's Graduates Are Screwed.
Wow, okay. That doesn't pull any punches.
No, it really doesn't. So our mission really is to unpack what the article is actually saying about the challenges young people seem to face right after university. We want to look at why this might be happening, what the data suggests, and maybe what it means going forward. And as always, the aim is to keep it clear, simple, no jargon if we can help it.
That title, it really makes you wonder, is it actually that bad out there for new graduates?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? The article kicks off by sort of reminding us of the old way, the traditional path.
Yeah.
You'd go to university, work hard, get your degree, and then, well, a decent graduate job was more or less expected, right? That was the setup for a stable career.
Yeah, that was definitely the promise for a long time. Get the paper, get the job. So what's shifted?
Exactly. But the piece argues that today's young people, even the really dedicated ones, seem to have, well, significantly fewer clear paths forward compared to before. It feels like a real contrast.
Fewer paths, fewer options. That seems odd, doesn't it? With more people getting degrees than ever. What kinds of options are we talking about?
Good question. And the article gets specific. Let me think. Okay, so for example, tech, the big tech firms, they're actually cutting jobs now, which is, well, big change from just a few years ago.
Right, they were hiring like crazy.
Exactly. Or think about the public sector. It just doesn't seem to have the same prestige or pull for graduates that it once did.
Yeah, I can see how that might change things for some people's choices.
And it goes further, like engineering, always seen as a solid path, right? But the article points out that a lot of the really cutting-edge stuff, maybe in electric vehicles or renewables, that innovation is often happening in places like China now. So the geography of opportunity is shifting. It feels like a global thing.
So it's not just one or two companies having a tough time. It's these bigger worldwide trends hitting whole sectors.
Precisely. And then there's law. The article flags that AI is seen as a real threat to lawyer jobs, especially entry-level ones. And journalism. Well, it's pretty blunt. It basically says don't even think about becoming a journalist.
Ouch. Don't even think about it. That's direct.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely about specific fields feeling the squeeze.
That's the picture it paints, yeah. The main idea is that across many Western countries, young graduates are losing that kind of privileged position they used to have. Or maybe they've already lost it.
Okay, that does sound serious. But is this just, stories and feelings, or is there actual data behind this?
Oh yeah, definitely data. It's not just anecdotes. The article brings in some quite stark numbers. There's research mentioned from Matthew Martin at Oxford Economics. He looked at Americans aged 22 to 27, the ones with a bachelor's degree or more. And here's the kicker. For the first time ever recorded, their unemployment rate is consistently higher than the overall national average.
Consistently higher. What does that consistently really tell us? Does it mean it's not just a one-off bad month or something?
Exactly right. Great question. Consistently higher means it's a pattern. It's sticking around month after month, staying above the average rate for everybody else. It's not a blip. And apparently this rise is mainly driven by graduates looking for their very first job. They're the ones finding it hardest to get started.
Ah, okay. So it's that first step onto the career ladder that's become particularly tricky. That makes sense.
Yeah, seems so. And it's not just an American issue. The article shows similar patterns in the European Union. The unemployment rate for young people with tertiary education is getting closer and closer to the overall youth unemployment rate.
Tertiary education. Can you break that down for us, just simply?
Sure thing. Tertiary education basically just means higher education. So university, college degrees, that sort of thing. So yeah, the unemployment gap between graduates and non-graduates in that age group is shrinking. Which isn't what you'd expect, right? If a degree gives you this massive advantage.
No, definitely not.
And their article says Britain, Canada, Japan, they're all showing similar trends.
Wow. So it really does feel like a global phenomenon, not just one country's problem. That's quite something. But is it hitting everyone, even people from the top universities, the really smart ones?
Apparently so. And this part really made me pause. Even graduates from elite places like Stanford's MBA program, the business school grads. In 2021, 91% of them had a job lined up 3 months after graduation. Pretty good, right?
Very good.
But this year, 2024, that dropped to 80%. Still high maybe, but a big drop. The article uses this phrase. It says, you can almost see the fear in their eyes, even if they look happy on the surface. It's quite a vivid image.
Fear in their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. It really suggests this is reaching even the most, well, privileged graduates. That's quite shocking.
It really is. And speaking of benefits, let's talk about the money side. There's something called the university wage premium. For a long time, this was actually growing.
Okay, wage premium. What exactly does that mean, Alex? Can you define that one?
Good one. So the wage premium is just the extra money that people with a university degree tend to earn compared to people who only finished high school. It's like the financial bonus for getting that degree.
Got it. The extra cash.
Right. And for years, that bonus was getting bigger. Graduates were pulling further ahead. But the article says recently that premium has shrunk in America, Britain, Canada.
So the financial payoff from degree is getting smaller. That's a pretty big deal if you're thinking about the cost of university.
It is. The article cites data from the New York Fed looking at young Americans. Back in 2015, the median college graduate.
Median. Yeah, that's the middle person, right?
Yeah.
Not the super high earners or the lowest, just the typical one.
Exactly that, the person right in the middle. So the median college grad in 2015 earned about 69% more than the median high school grad by last year. That gap had shrunk to only 50%. That's a big drop in less than 10 years.
Wow. So earning less compared to non-graduates, and even the top grads are finding it harder to get jobs. Okay, I'm following this.
Yeah. And it's not just the money, apparently. Job satisfaction seems to be slipping, too. There's a big survey mentioned, and it suggests the gap in how likely graduates are to say they're very satisfied with their job compared to non-graduates. Well, that gap has shrunk, too. It used to be about a 7-point advantage. Now it's only about 3 points.
Less money and less satisfying work. It really does paint a challenging picture overall for graduates today.
Okay, so if that's the situation, the big question is why? Why are graduates seemingly losing these advantages? The article looks at a couple of ideas. One theory it floats is, well, maybe universities expanded too much, too fast, and standards dropped.
The too many graduates, not enough quality argument, is that what it's saying?
That's one angle, yeah. It mentions a study by Susan Carlson and others that suggested quite a few students are, get this, functionally illiterate.
Functionally illiterate. That sounds really bad. What does it actually mean practically? Does it mean they literally can't read?
No, not quite like that. It's more about struggling with the reading and writing skills needed for everyday tasks or, more complex texts. The study apparently found lots of English majors were confused by Charles Dickens. They were, and this is the word the article used, bamboozled by the opening lines of Bleak House.
Bamboozled, like totally confused by Dickens. For an English major, wow, that does sound like a potential issue with understanding.
Right. Makes you think. But then the article pushes back on that idea a bit. It says there isn't really a clear long-term link between how many graduates there are and how much extra they earn. Both went up in the U.S. in the 80s, for example.
Okay.
And it also suggests that, if you actually talk to students, especially at top universities, you wouldn't think they're unintelligent. It calls Stanford students ferociously intelligent.
Right, so blaming the students or the universities feels a bit too simple, maybe. So if it's not mainly about quality going down, what's a stronger reason? What else does the article point to?
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The article highlights a new paper by someone named Leila Bengali from the San Francisco Fed. She points towards demand factors, specifically a slowdown in something called skill-biased technological change.
Whoa, okay. Skill-biased technological change. That's quite a technical phrase. Can you translate that into simpler English for us? What does that mean for jobs?
Okay, yeah, let's break that down. Basically, for a long time, new technology tended to favor workers with higher skills, more education. Think computers needing people who knew how to use them well.
Right.
But that trend seems to be slowing down. So putting it plainly, it means employers can now often hire people without a degree to do jobs that maybe 10 or 15 years ago absolutely required one.
Okay. So the technology isn't just helping the highly educated anymore. It's actually making some jobs accessible to people without degrees, jobs that used to need one. That's a really big shift in thinking.
Exactly. And why? Well, think about tech literacy now. It used to be that university was where you really got comfortable with computers, right? But now everyone has a smartphone. So non-graduates are often pretty adept with tech too, as the article puts it.
Mm-hmm.
And data from Indeed, the job site, suggests educational requirements are actually easing up in almost every sector. Like in the U.S., the professional and business services sector employs more non-graduates now than 15 years ago, even though there are fewer non-graduates in the workforce overall.
That is a huge turnaround. So it's less about graduates being less skilled and more about non-graduates becoming more skilled in ways that businesses need now, just through everyday tech use.
That seems to be a big part of the argument, yeah. The playing field is getting leveled by widespread tech skills. And on top of that, employers have also been cutting back in those industries that used to just hoover up graduates.
Which industries are those? The ones that were always the go-to first job spots?
Yeah, exactly those. Like in the EU, the number of 15 to 24-year-olds working in finance and insurance dropped 16% between 2009 and 2024.
Wow, 16%.
Yeah. In America, legal services jobs, barely more than in 2006. And in the UK, the classic path was a grad scheme at a bank. Well, since 2016, the number of 20-somethings in law and finance jobs has actually fallen by 10%. It even mentions that TV show, Industry.
Oh yeah, the banking drama.
Right. It notes that by the third season, a lot of the original graduate characters have been pushed out of the firm, kind of reflecting this trend.
That's a really interesting parallel. It does sound like those traditional pipelines are narrowing quite a bit. So, is this all down to AI then? Is ChatGPT just eating up all the entry-level jobs?
That's the immediate thought, isn't it? Especially because AI does look like it could automate a lot of that basic knowledge work, like drafting emails or simple research. But, and this is important, the article stresses that these trends we're talking about, they actually started before AI, like ChatGPT, became such a big deal.
Oh, right. That's key. So AI might be adding to it now, but it wasn't the original cause. So what else was going on?
Well, the article says lots of contingent factors are responsible.
Contingent factors. Okay, what does contingent mean here? What kind of factors?
Good question. Contingent factors are basically things that are happening alongside, things that depend on other circumstances. They're not the single root cause, but they definitely contribute. So in this case, it's things like, well, many of those graduate-heavy industries have just had a rough patch. Mergers and acquisitions have been slow, which means less work for lawyers. Investment banks are maybe less aggressive, less go-getting, as the article says, than before the 2007-09 financial crisis. So it's a mix of things, industry cycles, economic pressures, not just AI, even if AI is part of the picture now.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like a convergence of different pressures all hitting at once, making it harder for graduates. Much more complex than just one single reason.
So with all that said, the really big question, especially for young people or parents thinking about university, is college still worth it? And in America, it seems people might be voting with their feet. Enrollment in bachelor's degree programs actually fell 5% between 2013 and 2022.
That is a noticeable drop. Interesting that it's happening in the U.S.
It is. But here's a twist. In many other rich countries, it's the opposite. Higher education is often cheaper, more state subsidized, right?
Right.
And there, enrollment is still rising. Across the OECD countries, excluding the U.S., university numbers went up from 28 million to 31 million in the decade to 2022. France saw a 36% rise in students, Ireland 45%.
So huge increases elsewhere, while the U.S. sees a dip. But the article mentioned something about governments subsidizing useless degrees. Is it saying that even if it's cheaper, maybe any degree isn't automatically useful now?
That's a sharp observation. The article does raise that point, suggesting some governments might be funding degrees that don't lead to obvious jobs, encouraging students to, quote, waste time studying. It points out that outside the U.S., students are often still choosing subjects maybe seen as less directly marketable, arts, humanities, social sciences. Their share is mostly growing. And then it adds, maybe slightly cheekily, inexplicably, so is enrollment in journalism courses.
Inexplicably. Given what it said earlier about journalism prospect, that's quite pointed.
It is. And it wraps up that thought by saying if these choices really reflect how young people see the future of work, then maybe, quote, they truly are screwed. It's a very stark conclusion to that section.
Wow. Yeah, that's a heavy statement to end on. It definitely feels like a really tangled issue with lots of different threads. What's the biggest takeaway for you, Alex? The main thing listeners should really grasp from this?
For me, the real core insight from this deep dive, the crucial thing, is that this isn't just about AI taking jobs or whether degree standards have slipped. It feels more like a fundamental shift in the economy. You know, what we even mean by skilled work is changing, and technology isn't automatically boosting demand for university-level skills in the same way it used to. That feels like the real game changer. Those old, reliable paths are just less clear, less certain, because the underlying demand from employers has shifted.
Yeah, I agree. It really underlines how the economy is constantly changing and what guaranteed success for one generation might not work for the next. It certainly gives you a lot to think about.
Absolutely. So, for you listening, given these trends, the article lays out the shrinking financial benefit, the shifting job market, the way technology is playing out. How do you think young people should navigate this? How should they best prepare for what's coming? Or maybe, what role should universities and governments play in helping them figure it out? Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for diving deep with us today.